Welcome to The Otherworlds, where we talk to authors of fantasy, supernatural, and paranormal stories. Let's open the portal and meet our guest. Hello, my name is Sandra Tan, and I am joined today by Wendy N. Wagner. Wendy is the editor-in-chief of Nightmare Magazine. She's also part of the editorial team behind Lightspeed. Her novels include The Deer Kings and An Oath of Dogs. She is a self-professed nature lover and hiker, although her new novel, The Girl in the Creek, might have you wondering about that a little bit. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the story today and the inspiration behind it and her editorial work. Welcome to the Other Worlds, Wendy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's lovely to actually get a chance to chat. I like to avoid spoilers, but I do want to say that I wanted to be a little upset with you for a few days after I finished The Girl in the Creek.
Oh no.
Not in a bad way, in a oh kind of way, if you know what I
Oh,
mean. So anyway, I always like it when a story takes me places that I do not expect. And I enjoyed that very much about The Girl in the Creek. So anyways, I have, I there were some things about it that I was curious about, and I found this great quote. Happiness is beneficial for the body, but it is grief that develops the powers of the mind. That is Marcel Proust who said that. And I
wow.
was really thinking about this with this story because it really stems from Erin's grief and how this drives her. What inspired you to write a story about a character who was being driven by their grief?
There's a couple of things. One is um, I don't expect anyone else to have read anything by Leopold Aldo, but he is a famous writer he writes about ecology, and he said, I'm gonna paraphrase a little, I'll probably get it a little bit wrong. He says the terrible thing about an ecological education is real knowing that we live in a world of wounds. And I think that for many of us who spend time outside in nature, and for whom nature is important, or people who, know anything about the environment, I think most of us are operating in a stage of grief all the time. Because we've lost so much, and our the beautiful places that we go to have been so harmed. And it's really heartbreaking. I started writing this book. I got the idea for this book by taking a drive up the Clackamas River, and about 3 months after we took that drive, Oregon was hit with this terrible windstorm that happened when we had hot weather, and just an enormous series of fires broke out around the region. And the places that we drove to that day sustained, devastating fires. And so that was sort of a feeling that was percolating in the back of of the writing process, was just these feelings of loss and sadness for places that will never be the same, right? Not in my lifetime, and maybe never ever. So there's that. But also at the time I was writing this, my dad had just had two pretty significant strokes.
Mm.
And so we as a family were starting to deal with, like, serious thoughts about what are we going to do about mom and dad, because they're not young anymore. And just having that sort of lots of thoughts about what we lose when our family members get old. So I think there's just like that kind of, all those personal feelings were sort of with me when I was writing this book.
Wow. I mean, you're right because we're watching natural disasters unfold at an unprecedented rate. I don't know if you saw the glacier collapse in Switzerland that that buried a
Oh,
town. And I mean, it's
oh
just,
my gosh. It's a nightmare, an absolute nightmare.
yeah, and it's you know, my sister lives in Banff and Calgary.
Oh,
She works at the library in Banff. And so last year when the forest fires were happening in Jasper, of course, there
oh
were
gosh.
alerts that were coming down that far, and and it's just constant monitoring, and it's quite terrifying because you usually think about, oh, these things happen somewhere else, but when you actually are seeing places that are touched by by fire and natural disaster and pollution. You go into this in the book, and so I wondered if that was part of the fabric of like the message that you wanted to convey, because the mining and the damage to the environment locally and how tainted things were. It's because we think about nature being clean and pristine. That's the idea, that's the goal, right? And yet
Yeah.
this place that on the surface, like, in the nice touristy part should seem so lovely, has all of this stuff lurking under the surface. So it seemed like you were trying to bring that out in the story.
Yay, I'm glad that came through because that was definitely something I wanted to do. I've lived, since I was 5 years old, I've lived in the west side of Oregon. And it's like the part of the state that's very luxurious and green. And when people come visit, they're kind of blown away by just the incredible nature that you can see. And it seems so undeveloped and pristine. But, you walk through just about any place that you can go hiking or walking, and you'll see like old logging debris. You'll see, trash that was older than me. You'll see new trash. You'll see all kinds of stuff. And you realize, like, especially if I'm really interested in local history. So it's like I'll read descriptions of what the place was like when white settlers first arrived. And it's just like, I can't even picture or comprehend like what it must have been like to live here with like that abundance of just dense life and creatures, and like even just the amount of like insect life that was like the background sounds to people's lives when they first came to settle here. Like it's really literally unimaginable for most Americans to try to imagine that soundscape because we've never heard it, and we probably never will. So it's kind of, yeah, even the places that we think are like, yeah, so healthy and so good and so abundant is just a shadow of what it used to be.
Yeah, which is
Gosh,
really
that's a downer. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, audience. We're starting off on the most serious possible note. I swear this is a really fun book.
fun, huh? That's the word that you would use to describe this book? Hmm. It is interesting because I do, I have a background writing crime fiction. So when I read the description of the book, my mind went one way in terms of where I thought it was going, and it was nowhere like that. It was it was like a hard left turn, like, oh no, we're not dealing with, it wasn't about a police investigation. It wasn't about that, really and truly. It was, and which I loved because I went into it thinking we were going to go one way, and we took this hard turn, and I was like, it just made the book so much more surprising for me, to approach it in a different way and to, push off the investigation aspects that you get from crime fiction aside, for the most part. Anyway, I personally enjoyed that aspect of
Oh,
it.
it's great to hear. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, I think that there's a lot of different ways to tell a story without always having to go to the same, route that most people choose, right? And so I think it's a lot of fun. And I will say that one of the things, I suppose maybe it's fun, I had a nickname for something in the book. You'll know what I mean, and I just don't want to give anything away, but I started calling it Sporeborg. That was That was my fun, I suppose.
I love that.
Yeah, but that kind of does bring me into what I wanted to ask about next because there are these interesting themes in this book about community and isolation, and I grew up in a small town, but I don't think it was as small as yours. So we had
Probably
TV.
not.
Yeah, we had TV. So not just because my dad was an electrician, but
We had TV, but it came in so sporadically and in such odd colors and snow patterns that you just really had to use your imagination to figure out what was going on.
we're the generation that remembers rabbit ears, right? Like, and
Yes.
yeah, like the early days of cell phones. Like if you stand on top of a table and lift your left leg, you can get 1 bar, right?
Oh, yeah, the good old days.
There's some of that going on in this book because there is sporadic cell coverage, which is legitimate in rural places. So, but I was thinking a lot about isolation and community because there's a drive in most people to connect and to form connections with other people. We form connections with our family, with the people who we're friends with, with our found family, people who we're very close to, and life partners and whatnot, right? Like throughout our life, and this is like such a driving force for a lot of people. But when you're in a small town, there's some interesting things that can really happen because you feel like on the one hand you know everybody, right? But on the other hand, if you don't have this strong connection to people, it can actually feel incredibly isolating. And I was really thinking about this with Scott um, in the story that there can be a wrong kind of community that can be very deadly. And this got me
Yeah.
thinking about social media. And I told you before I was going to ask you about your why you wrote a commentary about social media, but that is what it made me think about. I wondered if that occurred to you at all, or what it was that you had in mind that you wanted to convey about the isolation and community in the book.
Sure. I think I have no idea who said this, but I think like a piece of advice I heard as a young person is like there's no feeling of like there's no worse sense of loneliness than being with the wrong people. And I think I just remember like when I was in college, I felt so alone, even though like I had roommates and tons of friends and I was like surrounded by people all the time. But it's like, I had grown up very lower class. We were very, very, we didn't have any money. And so I went to like a private liberal arts college and on top of it all, I went to college when I was very young. I started college when I was 16. And so that first year of college was just brutal because I was like a little alien. I didn't have I didn't have like the social background of everybody else. I didn't have the same clothes. I couldn't go out and do the same things that they could because I didn't have any money. And it was just, yeah, it was so isolating and so lonely. And that sense of loneliness just embedded inside me. And it made college very, very hard for me. And like my senior year, everybody else was like, yeah, after class, let's go get beers. And I'm like, I can't go get beers because I'm not 21 yet, that kind of thing. And so I think I have a real sympathy for people who find themselves isolated and alone. And I felt like um, the kind of the major player characters in this book kind of feel that way. Even Erin, she comes to town with a big group of friends, but I feel like in many times she kind of is questioning her connection with them. I think there's even like a point where one of the guys, Matt, he's like, he's just like one of those kind of like athletic, good looking, has never had to struggle a day in his life kind of guys. And she isn't even sure she likes him, even though he's like come out to do her this favor and help her with this project. And it's not until the middle of the book when she's like, you know what, actually, Matt is a good guy. And I think we really are friends, that I do like him. Um, and it's funny because I've seen like some early reviews and people are like, they don't they think like the relationships between the characters are kind of weird. And I'm like, well, sometimes relationships are weird and difficult. Sometimes you're like, well, I hang out with these people, but I don't know if they get me and I don't know if I get them. And yeah, sometimes it's like relationships are hard. And Scott is a character who I think now like at one point his mom, who is a very I loved writing the character of Olivia Vanderpool. Uh, she says, these days Scott probably would have been recognized as being like on the autism spectrum, but like he grew up in the 80s, he's meant to be sort of my age, maybe a touch older, and he just kind of slipped through the cracks. And then he comes back to this small town as a teacher, and he's cut off from people in a lot of different ways. Like, his family is this like aristocracy of the lumber town, which sets him off. But also he just can't he's interested in all this cosmopolitan and interesting stuff like art, and nobody else is. And yeah, he's just a very, very, very lonely person, I think.
Yeah,
And I didn't even think about social media, but man, is there no place like social media to make you also feel like some days you have like amazing connections. I made some of my very best friends I made on Twitter back in like 2009. And now like they've moved to like my town and we go and we do things all the time. And sometimes I'm on like, I left Twitter in part because you'd be on there and you'd just be, yeah, you just felt so isolated and judged, and like people are just like watching you like, are you gonna make a mistake, can I call you out for something? But
yeah,
it's not a fun feeling.
yeah. There's nothing quite as isolating as being on social media and nobody notices that you're there, too.
Yeah, exactly, that's a terrible thing too. That's like so terrible.
Yeah, and so I got that was I think why I got thinking about it because especially since everything that's happened in the last few years, right? Social media is so fractured now, and it makes it harder to organize and to communicate and to network because you're like, oh, well, which social media is this person on and which one is it? And these people are not on this and you're trying to, and like so when all
Yeah,
that fracturing happened, it was kind of like, where do you go? How do you stay with your people? And it
yeah,
and everybody's trying to make these decisions themselves in real time while we're dealing with options that aren't quite what we used to have. Anyway,
yeah.
it got me,
Well, I also think another great point that you just made that I didn't really think about is, the other big point of view character in this novel is, the strangeness, which is like a fungus that, you know, connects different kinds of creatures to create like a network. I don't think I'm giving anything away when I say that because it's the very first point of view character you actually experience in the novel. Um, and so the beings that are caught up in the strangeness, they're very well connected with a network, but it's not a network that they got to design or choose. They don't get to Nobody gets to say like, oh yeah, I really want to hang out with my friend, so let's both be dialed into the strangeness. The strangeness picks who it gets to use. And yeah, that's kind of like being on like, well, I can be on Instagram, but it's designed by, Meta in certain ways. So like I don't get to control that. I don't get to pick the ways that it makes connections for me and things like that. So yeah, it is kind of a great metaphor for how social media works or doesn't work.
yeah, and the dangers as well of being continuously online because once you're plugged in, you're swept into this current. I mean, with the strangeness, that's the case, but like it's also true with social media. Like once you're in it, you don't know when somebody. I mean, I've seen this happen to other people. I've seen people go like, "Oh, I don't like this person, so I'm going to dig through years of history of their tweets, and then I'm going to like screenshot it and like, oh, look, they posted something problematic back in 2009." And try to you take a day off social media and you come back and all of a sudden you're the topic of the day, right? You don't know that that isn't going to happen. I've seen it happen to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just it. And so there becomes that sense of like you need to always be on and always monitoring and always aware of what's going on so that you can position yourself as well if controversy arises. Yeah, it's kind of it's quite overwhelming. And yeah, so I was yeah, it was just something that was definitely in the back of my mind when I was reading it. But it's interesting what you said about people feeling like some of the relationship dynamics were strange because I really, I mean, I guess I felt it more from the sense of like Erin was that small town girl and she had a certain mindset. She didn't have a great family life. You know, dad was always working, mom's an alcoholic, and of course, she's lost her brother. So, that's her current reality. But like, so really growing up, her brother was her big, you know, support system, really, and her main point of connection. And there aren't even really references to like old childhood friends so much. She's started to develop a friend network as she's gotten older, and Harry is the main friend, and the relationship that they have is very it seems very tight to me. But all of these other peripheral people who she does not know as well, like when you don't know people as well, you are wondering, well, what do they think of me? And I don't know how well I know them. And it's also when you're like the plain Jane person like me, right? It's easy to look at somebody who is as handsome and all together as a guy like Matt, and think like, well, why would he be friends with me?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. I have definitely had those same kind of experiences, right?
yeah, like to me, it fed from a place of sort of, in part, her insecurities. She even says it at one point. She's like, "I'm not an investigative journalist." And I was thinking kind of like, well, you might be selling yourself short, but that speaks to like her own perception of herself. And that, and how you see yourself affects those relationships with other people. So I don't know. I mean, I thought it was really appropriate. I mean, in my personal opinion, it because this felt like, as well, when you meet people through other people, you kind of get guided through their lens to a certain degree, but like it isn't until you spend time one on one with somebody who you really, really start to get to know them. So it's like it's when she's in a vehicle with Matt and it's just the two of them that it starts to occur to her. He isn't a bad guy. He's a pretty good guy, right? Like that to me felt like a natural progression.
Oh, awesome. I'm so glad that worked for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I mean, that was how I saw it. So I don't know, and everybody's going to have their own interpretation, but I suppose it's because I related to her, and also moving as an adult, let me say, like, it's really hard to make friends.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's super hard.
Yeah. So when you go through experiences like that, then you kind of realize, how awkward it can be to form those connections, those deeper connections that other people already have, especially when other people in that group are tight and you feel like an outsider. That's
Yeah.
so that's kind of, to me, Erin was an outsider within that peer group, but also she was an outsider in the town, and of course that drew a certain amount of attention to her. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So, I did like the relationship that she had with her brother, and there was one reference that you had in the book to Aaron and Brian watching horror movies with Joe Bob Briggs, um, you know, and then having nightmares afterwards and comforting each other. And so I
was curious about what movies or shows have given you nightmares.
Ah, um, you know, I don't get a lot of nightmares from horror movies. A lot of times, if I do have dreams that come from horror movies, they're usually more like action adventure dreams. Except the movie 28 Days Later, when I saw it the first time, uh, when it was a pretty new movie at the time. I remember like waking up in the night and just being like, oh, I have to get up and like get like some of those like visions out of my head. Because I think like that's a movie that's got like terrible, scary zombies, but also some of the most amazingly awful like human behavior possible. And it's just like a dark, troublesome movie in that regard. And I really love it. And I can't wait to see the duology that's the 28 years later that comes out this year. So, yeah, it's a good time to be thinking about that. So, that's definitely a movie that has given me nightmares. Um, Horror novels also don't usually give me nightmares. A book that did, though, is I'm suddenly blanking on the title. There's this wonderful mystery thriller writer named Nevada Barr, and she writes books that are set in different national parks. And the one book that she has that is set in Estes National Park is about a serial killer who decides to train other serial killers. And that book, whoa, that book gave me nightmares. It is so scary. It is, yeah.
Ooh, that one sounds intense. I'm gonna have to check
Yeah.
that out.
That series is really, really a blast. It's like kind of the perfect mix of two some of my favorite flavors in one delightful package because it's got a lot of every book has a lot of hiking and information about national parks while at the same time solving terrible murders usually.
Yeah, you talk like you like the national parks and everything. I have to say, like, w- I mean, were you intending to try to scare everybody out of Mount Hood National Forest with this book? Because you had me a little nervous, like, I don't know if I want to go into the woods after this.
I have definitely seen the lines like "You'll think twice about going hiking after reading this book,"
Mhm.
or "You'll be too scared to go into the woods." And I'm like, I don't. Maybe I'm not selling this like outdoor adventure part of life well enough. Yeah. Well, I mean, there is as much as I do love being out there, it can be scary sometimes. Like if you're out by yourself, even on like a trail that's not in the middle of nowhere, you just have these, I think, instinctive discomfort being alone in the woods. That part of some little part of your brain just like instantly activates, like, out here, I could be dinner. And I think as a horror writer, I couldn't resist going there, even though I do just really love being out there in the trees and nature.
Yeah, I love nature, but I definitely had some of these moments where I was like, But I mean, I think there's like such a thing as a healthy fear too with nature. And and
Being
then
cautious.
yeah. So and then there's also
Well,
like
I
plenty
think
of don't know.
oh, sorry, I just
Oh
totally
no.
interrupted you.
No,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to say, I do feel like in this book, pretty much the most dangerous thing that you run into at every turn is people. Like they're the real problem. There are the poachers and serial killers, and there's the really bad stuff is not um our friendly plants and animals, and those things are just trying to like live. They're not really like intentionally causing problems.
Well, not for everybody, maybe. So yeah, it's interesting why as well. Like you have those the Stedman brothers in this book, and I think all women have known somebody who fits into that category in their lifetime at some point or another. And so
Yeah.
I was wondering, like, is that why you wanted to include them in the story and have them act the way that they did towards women?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So kind of the backstory for the Stedman brothers and how they came to be in the book is I'd been reading some articles about this huge, pretty horrific poaching ring that operated in Washington in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. And I really, after reading about them, I wanted to include poaching because I knew that was also an issue in Oregon. And it seemed like something important to me. And I was like, I want to make these poachers just so unsympathetic. What's like the jerkiest kind of person I could think of? And my brain immediately went to a certain kind of guy and a certain, definitely people that I've seen in my own life. I've seen other, uh, people have to deal with. And I just think like there are a lot of men out there who are not kind and treat people like doormats and worse. And yeah, so they just sort of evolved out of my desire to want to write just a really unpleasant character.
Mission accomplished.
But I did think like something that surprised me when I wrote about them is there's a character in the novel who her name is Dahlia, and she's like a river outfitter and guide, and she's pretty badass woman, and has her own business, has adventures, is a leader in her community. And when these guys that she's known since high school, who have always like put her down and made her feel small, even though she's a grown ass woman, they still can make her feel small. And like I thought, like I surprised myself when I wrote the scene with them together, and I was like, oh, but that so happens. I've seen it happen so many times when like people the things that happen to you when you are young, like it's just like leaves such an impression on you that even though you're normally 100% a different way when you're around that one person, boy, you become somebody else. So that was a scene that, I mean, I hated the fact that I wrote it, but I also like it was a wonderful experience writing it at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's very relatable. I've been there and in so many different ways, because like in my experience of being bullied, um, I wouldn't fight back. I wouldn't even protect, like, I mean, I would, try to shield myself, but like I wouldn't even fight back to protect myself. So, yeah, so been there and, suffered some permanent physical damage because of it, but
Holy moly.
but like it just was never, it's kind of like there's that part of you that reflects back and you like wish that maybe you would have responded in a different way in the situation. But, people talk about the fight or flight, but sometimes you just freeze and that's what you do. And so when I read
Yeah.
that, I felt like it was like, I can completely understand this because you can be smart and strong and very capable with so many different things. But when it comes to that type of, of abuse from somebody, all of a sudden you can just deflate and freeze and, and not respond in the way that you might hope that you would. So, and and it was also a telling moment because it was very interesting how that revealed so much about Kayla's character, in that moment as well. So, I thought it was a very powerful scene um, in the story. So, again, another thing that resonated with me when I was reading it. So, um, now you also have this line in the book, and it says, "Of all the strange things she had encountered in Faraday, this had to be the strangest." And I wondered when I read that line, Did you ever worry about going too far with the weird elements?
I wrote this book. I had written a novel called The Deer Kings. And I thought it was a great book and it meant a lot to me. And at the time, I had just fired my science fiction agent because he didn't really want me to write horror. And I was like, you know what, horror is like my whole world and I'm just gonna focus on that for a while. And so I was trying to land an agent and I didn't get anywhere. And I was kind of bummed out about it, but I was like, you know what? The next time I write a novel, I'm not even gonna worry about selling to an agent. I'm gonna write a book that's just for me. It's gonna be like as fun and horrific and weird as I want it to be. And and every now and then during the writing, I was like, is this getting too weird? I don't care. And so by the end of the book, it gets it gets really, really odd and bizarre. And but you know what? I love that. I love movies and books that like just kind of go like way into the out there. I think it's a real treat. I think a great example of that would be like a movie that just came out with The Substance. You know, it goes and goes until at the end it's like, I'm just gonna go all the way and be as wacky as I want to. And it worked and it was great. And I love that movie. I feel that way about Girl in the Creek. And actually, it's funny when I got done with that book, I wasn't even going to try to like send it to agents because I was like, this book is too weird for agents. I'm just going to send it to like a small press publisher. And a friend was like, you should at least try. Like, just send it to a few people, see if you get any responses. And then who knew? It like, apparently it wasn't too weird for like my agent or tour night prior. So I was like, I guess it worked out. Anyway, I hope people who love weird stuff find it. So,
Oh, I hope so too. Now, I was wondering about one thing in the story because I've alluded to the fact that, this story went in directions that I wasn't expecting. And as a storyteller, I wondered how important is surprise for you in storytelling? Like, there's a lot of emphasis on twists. Is that something that you focus on, or is it something you think is overrated?
um, it's not something I really think about when I'm writing. I typically, when I get an idea for a story, I just am just exploring how like all the pieces then come together, and I want to build something that's really satisfying for myself. And I don't even think about like I don't think I have ever once while writing anything ever thought about like a plot twist or something like that. Like to me, yeah, I'm just trying to explore like what kind of seems to naturally build off of each element that I've created and sort of taking it to like its utmost progression. Um, so yeah, I don't know. And when I read, most of the time I feel like I very rarely read a book and I'm like, ooh, that was a plot twist. I didn't see that coming. I'm just like, oh, that makes sense. That's how that grew and happened. And I don't think I'm like some magical reader. I guess I just take things as they go.
There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes, I mean, yeah, it's funny because like there have been times the stories really surprised me, and because my mind is always trying to be like ahead and projecting,
Yeah.
then I feel surprised, and I like it when an author surprises me. I like it, but at the same time, there's something comforting about reading a story where you know where it's going and you're seeing how that happens as opposed
Yeah.
to what happens. I don't know. That's something that I like. So I just wondered after this book comes out, do you have any concerns about being like banned from bed and breakfasts or small towns?
Oh gosh. Well, luckily, I have a hunch that most bed and breakfast owners in small towns are probably don't have a lot of free time and probably aren't going to be picking up like anything but like the biggest hit novels of the year. So, if they're horror lovers, they're probably going to be reading Stephen Graham Jones's The Buffalo Hunter, and they probably won't get to my book. So I'm probably safe from being banned. But if I do get banned, I guess I'll just have to like bring my camping gear.
yeah, it was just fun at the beginning, like, reading about the V&V, and then what was it that Matt said? Like, oh, it probably smells like potpourri.
Yeah.
Those those little comments. It was kind of fun to think about that perception because B&Bs are so much different than staying in a hotel or staying in even an Airbnb because like you don't have that same independence. There's
Yeah.
there's that dynamic of somebody else there. And obviously you chose the B&B route, because it gave you the opportunity to have Olivia's character, which is a character who I very much enjoyed. She's a very layered character, very interesting to watch her progression throughout. Uh, but before we wrap things up, I was curious because, obviously you are an editor and you edit both horror and sci-fi. So I was curious about um, what whether you see shifts in submissions based on what's currently popular. Like I'm wearing a Squid Games t-shirt. Like after a show or a movie comes out or a book and it's really successful, do you find that a lot of people try to imitate those stories or go in that direction with those themes?
Um, I say yes and no. Uh, a huge driver for what we see in submissions is has to do with like other publishing opportunities that come up, and those publishing opportunities are often driven by things that are happening in the zeitgeist. So, like when I first started editing as the editor in chief at Nightmare, and we opened to submissions, there had been a magazine that opened that was Mermaids Monthly, and it
Mm.
we got so many stories about evil mermaids and mermaid adjacent things because they were things that people had written for this other market that hadn't been accepted. And so people were trying to find homes for it. So that definitely is like a big driver. You're like, anytime there's a themed anthology, like, oh, I'm gonna see a whole lot of stories like that. Like that evil pizza anthology is gonna have an evil pizza wave of stories in my inbox. Um, but also I do think like there are just like I don't even know if they have to do with like popular TV shows, or I don't know what sparks some of this stuff, but things do tend to come in waves. When I very first started at Lightspeed Nightmare in 2014, was just it was like an era of thin eater stories. We got tons of submissions. We wound up publishing a lot of them. It was just like I don't know of any TV shows or movies that were like focused on sin eaters. It was just they were in the air or something. Um, so yeah, things do come in waves, and I don't necessarily know what triggers them.
Yeah, I remember the pizza anthology. So it's interesting to hear you mention that one because I do remember. Yeah, and I mean, and I did Spine Tingler magazine. I was the founder and editor of that e-zine from the aughts. So but it's interesting how I think for me the stories that always stood out the most were the ones that were just like so oddball and unexpected. Like, and I
Yeah.
mean the best way. Like, there was a story that we published that was about a guy who basically felt like he was like starting to have an affair, more or less, with his girlfriend's toothbrush.
Wow.
That
What
story
a
has
winner.
stayed with me for like almost 20 years now since
Wow.
we published it because it was just so unexpected where it went.
Yeah.
So,
That's so amazing.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
you know what's the kind of story that has been having like a real bloom in the last couple of years, and I don't know why, is like reflections on Ursula K. Le Guin's Omelas story. Like there's one that's up for a Hugo now by Isabel J. Kim. But we published like an Omelas story last year, which I mean we buy these things like year or two in advance. So who knows how long it's been in our inventory. So like at Lightspeed, we published a story about Omelas last year. We've got another one coming out this year, maybe two, maybe this is the second one this year. Like, I don't, why are people obsessed with the kid who lives in the basement and who's being tormented right now? I mean, I don't know, maybe that's relevant to our society right now, but yeah, so yeah, it's weird, but yeah, I do love it when like absolutely bizarre things come in. Like a story we published that I still feel is like completely wacky is like an apocalypse that transformed the whole world into like insane clown party references. Like the world ends in a reign of Fago. Like, I don't know, where did that come from? It's so weird. I love it.
it's definitely unpredictable, which is part of the fun too, of like, oh, look where this ended up. Not at all where you were thinking, right? So,
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's like extra important now because we haven't been open to submissions much in a while because well, I bought a whole bunch of stuff the last time we were open. I was like, well, I should stop buying stuff, but this is good. I have to buy it. Um, so we haven't been open much, so we haven't had to deal a lot with like AI submissions. And I just feel like, AI is a prediction machine and it works on probabilities. So it's gonna write the things that are most likely to be associated with, whatever you prompt it with. And that's not what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in what's most likely. I'm interested in weird stuff, like guys falling in love with their girlfriend's toothbrush, like just the weird stuff that somehow comes out of people's brains.
yeah, and I think that's true because, I think that's the what people these AI arguments, it's one thing that you can never really get across to the people who think that it's totally fine to quote unquote write with AI is that you're never going to have something that's wholly original, something that, can only come from that person's mind. And that's part of what's intriguing about, discovering new writers is like, oh, look where they took this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I
So,
mean, the reason why I want to read is because it's a way to connect with other people via their words. If there's no other person on the other side, well, I'm not going to have a connection. So, and
yeah.
I have no interest in using AI because the reason I write is to think about the world. Like that's I I have become the kind of person where I realize like I don't know what I think about things until I have written something about it. I'm if I have AI do the writing, then I'm not doing the thinking. So what do I get out of it? It's not I also think like, boy, if you want to use AI for your writing, I don't know. I don't think most people who are writers are experiencing an incredibly lucrative world of opportunities in publishing. Uh,
Yeah, and it
maybe I'm just a little
definitely.
jaded.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't profess to understand the mindset other than just a cheating, what I would call the back, sneaking in the back door in terms of like, I don't want to put in the work. So here, I'm going to have this machine do it for me. I mean,
And one thing that we have seen over the years at Lightspeed and Nightmare is there is a kind of person that takes a perverse joy in like it's publishing a short story is like a game for them and they want to win and they want to subvert the rules. So, these are the same kind of people that like when you have a call for submissions that are just for like one kind of writer, they're like, I'm going to submit anyway and trick people into thinking that, I'm a black woman from Nigeria when really I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm a white dude. Like, it's just like something people do because it's a game, you know? Like, we had a story on our we published a story by a guy named Sharong Beeswath, and I probably just totally butchered his name. He had a story called Waiting for Jonah, and somebody copied the story off of the website and submitted it to dozens, if not hundreds, of magazines. Some of those magazines don't even pay anything. Most of them pay like nothing. And like this guy was just, he did that with all kinds of poems and short stories that he just stole off the internet. And it wasn't like he was making any money doing it because he's sending it to magazines that don't pay anything. He just, I guess, did it because yeah, it was a game and he wanted to win, and it made him happy to get published by cheating the system. So I think maybe there's a little bit of that going on too. Like, it's a game.
Yeah, I suppose there could be, but like, wow, I don't understand. I like to think I don't understand the mindset, and yet people are just, well, unpredictable. And some
Yeah,
people are really just awful. Like, I don't know who has the time for that. But,
not me.
what do you want to be able to put like, publishing credits on your Tinder profile or something? Like, I mean, what's the point? Like I don't know what the point is. You know,
Yeah.
but I mean, everybody I suppose has their motivations, I guess, but yeah, that's craziness. That's crazy. I'm sure that it's gonna I mean, I know that there've already been issues that have arisen for some of the publications with deluge of AI submissions and stuff, and I'm sure it's going to be an ongoing uh issue for you that I don't envy, how you're going to deal with sorting this all out and and I think the worst thing is the thought of like having something slip past because it is really like the AI checkers are not very good. It means some of them. I mean, I certainly know Grammarly's isn't. You can change one word and it'll, all of a sudden 26% appears to be written by AI and it's just because it recognizes structural form, right? Oh, you made a list. This looks like AI. You know, it's
Yeah.
it's certainly it's not very accurate in that respect. At least that's what I've found in messing around with it. So, well, it has been great to chat with you about your book, and I'm very excited for the release. I know that you're doing an event. I know you're doing an event near where you live when the book comes out. Are you doing tour?
Actually, I am really lucky because I do get to do some touring. So, yeah, I think on July 15th, I'll be launching the book in Portland, Oregon. The 16th, I go to Denver to do an event at the Tattered Cover. Uh, the 17th, I'll be in Rogers, Arkansas at Underbrush Books. The 18th, I go to Minneapolis. I can't wait to go visit this bookstore. It's been on like my dream bookstore list, so I can't wait to go to Milkweed Books. And then the 19th, I'll be in Collegeville, Pennsylvania, which I'm also very excited about. That's at Town Book Center, I think is what it's called. And then I come back to the West Coast, and I think it's the 21st. I have an event at Elliott Bay Books in Seattle. And
Wow.
I've just been invited to the Tampa Bay Comic Convention. So I can't wait. I love Comic Cons. They are so fun. And I've never been to Florida. So I'm really stoked.
Oh, wow. That sounds fantastic. Well, I hope that the tour goes well. I hope that tons of people get a chance to come out and see you and discover a Girl in the Creek. And I hope that they find the end as surprising as I did. And, there's a saying that the ending of a book sells your next book. And now I want to know when your next one's coming out. So,
I would like to know too, like if the publishers, I think right now I think, there's a lot of folks sitting back and saying, well, we'll see how Girl in the Creek does before we buy a new book. So I have two books that are like looking for homes. So it's like, get them homes. They're fun, I promise.
Well, hopefully, Girl on the Creek will help get them there.
I
So
hope so.
I wish you all the best with your release.
Oh, thank you, Sandra.
Thanks for chatting today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.